Welcome to the morning edition of Arirang News. It's April 25th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Bo-kyung, filling in for Kim Da-mi. We begin with the top stories at this hour. Seoul and Washington agreed to seek a package deal by July aimed at removing U.S. tariffs on South Korea during high-level trade talks. U.S. President Donald Trump says tariff talks between the U.S. and China are close to a deal, but Beijing hits back, calling the claim baseless. YouTube is 20 years old, and content from South Korea has been chosen as some of the biggest moments in the platform's history. Finance and trade officials from South Korea and the United States met in Washington for talks as Seoul seeks a path to be exempted from tariffs before the pause on tariffs ends in July. Ji has the key takeaways from the meeting.
South Korea and the United States have agreed to produce a package of deals to remove new U.S. tariffs before the July 8 deadline, when the 90-day pause on reciprocal tariffs is lifted. This was discussed by South Korea's Deputy Prime Minister Choi Sang-mok and Trade Minister An Dok-gun, alongside U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer, during a high-level meeting in Washington on Thursday local time. Seoul's Trade Ministry said in a statement that it requested exemptions from reciprocal tariffs and offered cooperation on shipbuilding and energy. Following the meeting, Finance Minister Choi said the two sides agreed to aim for a deal by early July and explained they will hold further discussions on four key areas of mutual interest: tariffs and non-tariff measures, economic security, investment cooperation, and currency policy.
We focus particularly on the automobile sector, which faces the greatest negative impact.
Che also said they asked for understanding from the U.S. as the negotiation process could be affected by Korea's political schedule and the upcoming presidential election. He added that the two sides agreed to discuss this in detail when Greer visits South Korea to take part in the APEC trade ministers meeting, scheduled to take place for 2 days starting May 15th. Meanwhile, Bessent also told reporters that the two countries had a very successful meeting, without disclosing further details on the talks.
We may be moving faster than I thought, and we will be talking technical terms as early as next week as we reach an agreement on understanding as soon as next week. So South Koreans came early, they came with their A game, and we will see if they follow through on that.
South Korea, which faces 25% U.S. reciprocal tariffs, is among the first countries the Trump administration has initiated trade talks with. Eyes are now on whether the two countries will be able to reach a fruitful deal that will exempt South Korea from higher levies. Ji, Arirang News.
U.S. President Donald Trump said the U.S. and China held talks on Thursday to resolve the trade war between the world's two largest economies. However, China rebutted the claims, calling it fake news, and said no talks have taken place. Lee Seung-jae has more.
U.S. President Donald Trump said Thursday that the U.S. and China held trade talks earlier in the morning in order to resolve the trade war between the two countries. Speaking to reporters at the White House, Trump said the contents of the trade talks may be revealed later, but did not elaborate further. Trump has suggested the day before that the U.S. was actively negotiating with China, raising hopes that a deal to substantially lower tariffs on Chinese imports could be imminent. Those remarks resulted in a stock market boost. However, Beijing refuted Trump's claims of trade talks between the world's two largest economies. According to the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson, Trump's claims are fake news.
This is fake news. As far as I know, China and the United States have not held consultations or negotiations on the tariff issue, let alone reached an agreement. The tariff war was initiated by the United States, and China's attitude is consistent and clear. If you want to fight, we will fight to the end. If you want to talk, the door is open. Dialogue and negotiation must be equal, respectful, and mutually beneficial.
While Trump had told reporters that talks were happening between the two countries, his Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said no formal negotiations had taken place. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
As we just heard, the South Korean delegation held high-level consultations with the U.S., asking for exemptions from its reciprocal and item-specific tariff measures, and agreed on some areas. With such negotiations of vital concern to export-based South Korea, we invited Professor Ho Jun-young for in-depth talks on this. Professor Ho, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me here.
Good morning. Now, Professor, so Seoul and Washington reportedly agreed to seek a package deal to be made by July. How did you see the outcome overall?
Yeah, as the first official consultation, this meeting was reportedly conducted in a friendly atmosphere. I think the meeting is remarked as the beginning of working level discussions and additional high-level talks in the future. The Korean government requested U.S. reciprocal and item-specific tax exemptions related to the Trump tariff, especially on car exports. Additionally, the Korean government proposed ways to cooperate to enhancing Korea's energy security and rebuilding the U.S. shipbuilding industry.
All right, I see. Now, Professor, it seems both countries, as you have already pointed out, agreed on a framework of consultations through the meeting, with working-level meetings to follow soon. How do you expect the talks to unfold, and could South Korea's cooperation in the shipbuilding and energy sectors help Seoul to counter Trump's tariff scheme?
I think so. The U.S. and Korea can establish a stable framework for deepening cooperations by setting joint agendas in fields such as technology. The U.S. is in urgent need of support in the shipbuilding sector, as you mentioned, while Korea possesses the world's most advanced capacity in shipbuilding. Moving forward, if Korea and the U.S. expand cooperation in shipbuilding and other technology and industrial sectors, it could serve as a kind of channel to broaden discussion into other areas, leading to favorable negotiations. Additionally, options such as increasing import of U.S. energy, investment in the U.S., and joining Alaska's LNG project could also serve as potential cards in the discussions.
All right, Professor, one more question on consultation results. Now, amid a continued high exchange rate in the 1,400 Korean won range, Finance Minister Choi Sang-mo pointed out that Seoul and Washington agreed to hold separate discussions on exchange rate policy. What could be discussed?
Regarding exchange rate policy, unlike tariff, it appears that only general discussions were held, that the U.S. has yet to present any concrete policies. Finance Minister Choi Sang-mo also stated that the two countries agreed to discuss exchange rate policy separately between Korea's Ministry of Economics and Finance and the U.S. Department of the Treasury, and he mentioned that working-level consultation would take place soon. However, it is expected the U.S. will eventually propose measures to address the economic damage caused by a strong dollar and the burden of interest rate payment on U.S. Treasury bond. Discussions related to these issues are anticipated to follow.
All right. Now, Professor, Trump is reportedly considering slashing its steep tariffs on Chinese imports to de-escalate the trade war. And not just that, he is also mulling over exemptions for automakers from some tariffs as well. Now, how will that affect both the global and the Korean economy?
President Trump has made it clear that an agreement between China and the United States is necessary, and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has also expressed the view that the stalemate with China caused by tariff is unsustainable and that the situation is expected to ease. The specific tariff rate could reference discussions held last year by the U.S. House Select Committees on the strategic competition between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party. During those discussions, it was proposed that items related to U.S. strategic interest be subject to a minimum tariff of 100%, while items only related to national security be subject to a 35% tariff. However, regarding automobile tariff, Donald Trump recently stated that the current 25% tariff on import car and key component could be raised further not just going down, so adding significant uncertainty to the situation.
All right, significant uncertainties linger. Now, Professor, even if further negotiations between Washington and Seoul go smoothly, many say if the trade war between the U.S. and China drags on, it would inevitably affect Seoul's economy as well. Now, South Korean economy already posted negative growth in the first quarter. How do you see the impact to be, and how should Seoul be prepared for it?
Yeah, we know that Korea is export-oriented economy. The trade tension resulting from Trump's tariff pose a significant challenge. Not only is the direct imposition of tariff on Korean problematic, but the indirect impact on overseas production base is also substantial. As trade tension have heightened recently, downside risks to growth have clearly increased. Foreign exchange market volatility has risen, and the direction of trade policy remains uncertain. In such circumstances, setting a baseline for economic growth forecast is I think is meaningless. To improve this situation, it is crucial to successfully conclude tariff negotiations with the U.S. government. And in the medium to long term, the pace of diversifying supply chains must be accelerated.
All right, I see, Professor. Well, that is all for now. Thank you, Professor He, for your insights today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
A former U.S. defense official under the Clinton administration believes the alliance between Seoul and Washington is the foundation of security in Asia, and that it should not be sidetracked by tensions over trade. Our senior correspondent Oh Soo-young sat down with him at the ASEAN plenum and shares his thoughts.
The South Korea-U.S. alliance is the cornerstone of military deterrence in Northeast Asia, and trade friction must not weaken it. That's the view of John Hamre, president of the Center for Strategic and International Studies and former U.S. Deputy Secretary of Defense, as Seoul and Washington begin a crucial round of high-stakes tariff talks in D.C. With U.S. duties on foreign steel, autos and aluminium still unresolved, along with new 10% baseline tariffs on all imports, Hamre says preserving strategic trust between the two allies is more important now than ever. While President Donald Trump's 90-day delay on rolling out country-specific tariffs has created room for dialogue with trading partners, expectations of a major breakthrough may be overly optimistic.
What I've heard from other governments that have had conversations on tariffs is that there are 4 things that are non-negotiable. The 10% base tariff is non-negotiable. The tariff on 25% on aluminum, 25% on steel is non-negotiable. That they've been told the tariff on cars and automobile parts is non-negotiable.
Still, Hamre sees an opening, especially for South Korea and Japan, to make meaningful progress. Acting President Han Duck-soo has called for a win-win solution, suggesting Korean shipyards could help boost America's naval vessel capacity. Seoul could also buy more U.S. liquefied natural gas and aircraft, and even address non-tariff barriers such as platform fees and pharmaceutical pricing.
Korea and Japan have sophisticated government agencies. So I think that you have an opportunity to, take advantage of this early moment. I think you're very fortunate as a nation to have an acting president who was a trade negotiator. I mean, he knows how these things go. He knows what the dynamic is like. He has a very good understanding of the Korean economy. So I think you are in, compared to most countries, pretty good condition for taking forward these conversations.
President Trump has suggested a one-stop shopping deal that presumably merges trade and defense cost sharing into a single package. However, Seoul believes security contributions and trade issues should be handled separately. In a new bilateral deal last year, South Korea had already agreed to hike its share of defense costs to support U.S. military presence on the peninsula.
I personally, I don't think it's easier to find a solution to either the tariff issue or the security issue if we put them together. Korea's spending almost 3% on its defense, and therefore that should be good enough on tariffs. So I do think it's probably important to focus on the foundational question of why is the alliance important. And I think you'll find a lot of support among American politicians for that.
The significance of these impending talks goes beyond figures. They speak volumes about the current US posture over the first 3 months of Trump's second presidency. Rather than reinforcing alliance principles or addressing regional security issues, Washington has doubled down on a transactional approach with its partners.
And in my view, the US-Korea alliance is the absolute foundation of security in Asia. If we're together, there won't be war. If we fall apart, I'm very worried about the future. So I hope we can stay together.
As talks begin, the consultations will not only be a test of trade policy, but of the strength and trust underpinning one of America's most vital alliances in the Indo-Pacific. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Turning to the latest in the presidential primaries. The Democratic Party candidates visited the party's stronghold Southwest region on Thursday to boost their votes as the primary closes on Sunday. Meanwhile, the People Power Party's one-on-one debate started, which will run until this weekend as well. Our Kim Do-yeon has more.
With the voting for the Democratic Party of Korea members in what's known as the Honam region, the traditional stronghold of the DP going on, the party's presidential primary contestants on Thursday all visited the region to push their candidacy. The Honam region consists of the Jeollado provinces and Gwangju City. Frontrunner Lee Jae-myung visited Jeollabuk-do province first, where he shared his renewable energy plans and went on to visit Gwangju City, located further south. There, he visited the May 18 pro-democratization movement sites and emphasized the importance of democracy, with a new election stemming from a president being impeached for declaring martial law. The two trailing candidates, Kim Kyung-soo and Kim Dong-yeon, are also in the region, visiting key local points to meet as many people as possible. The voting in this region closes on Saturday. Meanwhile, the last set of regions for voting, the capital region Gangwon-do province and Jeju, started on Thursday. This wraps up on Sunday, when the final winner will be announced at the party's convention. Meanwhile, for the People Power Party, 2 one-on-one debates were held for the second round of its primary. With the PPP race having no clear frontrunner, these second-round debates are expected to be crucial. Kim Moon-soo and Han Dong-un kicked them off, as Kim is known to have been against Yoon's impeachment and Han was pro-impeachment. Kim questioned Han about his fallen relationship with former President Yoon. One thing to keep an eye on in the PPP race is this aspect, as some PPP electors still support Yoon. And for the second round, the votes will be 50% PPP electors and 50% on open survey, giving more weight to individual PPP electors. A similar debate took place between An Chol-soo and Kim Moon-soo. An famously voted for Yoon's impeachment motion, and Kim pointed out that An even served as the chair of the Presidential Transition Committee. For Friday's two debates, Han Dong-un and Hong Jun-pyo picked each other for their slots, making their debate a 3-hour-long one. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Amid concerns in Seoul over Chinese structures built in disputed waters of the West Sea, Beijing has reportedly said that South Korean officials can visit the area and see the structures for themselves. This was conveyed during a closed-door meeting in Seoul on Wednesday between officials from the two countries, when China claimed the structure was built for fish farming and that it had nothing to do with territorial rights. From 2018 until last year, China built 3 structures in the Provisional Maritime Zone, where the two countries' exclusive economic zones overlap, causing concern in South Korea that Beijing could possibly be seeking territorial rights in the area. The U.S. State Department also criticized China on the issue this week, saying Beijing's refusal to abide by international law causes instability in the region. YouTube celebrates its 20th anniversary this year, and content originating from South Korea has been chosen among the biggest moments in the platform's history. The New York Times marked the occasion on Wednesday with the 18 biggest moments, which include Psy's Gangnam Style and the children's song video Baby Shark. The article said that Psy released his song Gangnam Style in July 2012, and by the end of that year, it had become the first video on the internet to surpass 1 billion views. It went on to say that the Baby Shark video became the most viewed video in YouTube history in November 2020 and still holds the record with 15.8 billion views.
Good morning, I'm Choi Ji-hee, and this is The World Now. Starting in Ukraine, Kyiv has seen the most devastating attack in 9 months as Russian forces fired a barrage of missiles and drones at the capital city overnight. In the early hours of Thursday local time, Russia conducted a massive combined missile and drone attack on Kyiv, killing at least 12 people and injuring over 90. The strikes, which began around 1 a.m., targeted multiple districts and caused significant damage to residential buildings and vehicles. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called the assault one of Moscow's most outrageous, while officials reported that it involved ballistic missiles. The attack comes amid heightened tension over negotiations to end the ongoing conflict. U.S. President Donald Trump urged Russian President Vladimir Putin to stop such attacks while continuing to pressure Ukraine for concessions. China has successfully launched its Shenzhou-20 crewed mission, sending 3 astronauts to the Tiangong space station. This marks the nation's 15th manned spaceflight. On Thursday at 5:17 p.m. local time, the Shenzhou-20 spacecraft lifted off on a Long March 2F rocket from a satellite launch center in northwest China. Approximately 6.5 hours later, it docked with the Tiangong space station. Mission Commander Chen Dong on his 3rd spaceflight and first-time astronauts Chen Zhongrui and Wang Jie will spend 6 months on the space station conducting spacewalks and field experiments. They will replace the Shenzhou-19 crew who have been aboard Tiangong for 175 days and are scheduled to return to Earth on April 29th. The European Union is set to present a comprehensive roadmap in May specifying its strategy to eliminate all imports of Russian fossil fuels by 2027. The initiative announced by European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen on Thursday is a response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 and aims to bolster the EU's energy independence. The EU has made significant progress in reducing Russian gas imports from 45% in 2021 to the current 18%, increasing LNG imports from the United States and gas supplies from Norway to compensate. The roadmap may include legal measures to allow EU companies to end existing contracts without penalties. Finally, in Rome, the Vatican is finalizing preparations for the funeral of Pope Francis, who died on Monday at the age of 88. The funeral scheduled for Saturday will reflect the Pope's wishes for a modest ceremony. The funeral mass in St. Peter's Square will be attended by some 130 foreign delegations, including 50 heads of state. Following the service, Pope Francis will be buried at the Basilica of St. Mary Major in Rome, marking the first papal burial outside the Vatican since 1903. A 9-day mourning period will begin after the funeral, during which masses will be held in memory of the late pontiff. The conclave to elect his successor is expected to commence after May 5th.
We've had a significant temperature drop overnight. It's also cooler than what we typically expect for late April. The afternoon will also be cooler than yesterday. And this weekend looks to be more of a typical spring weather with large daily temperature swings. However, we do have some yellow dust drifting in, which could make the air quality a bit hazy in the central regions and Gyeongsang-do provinces, especially during the morning hours. Then afternoon highs will be 1 to 9 degrees Celsius lower than yesterday, topping out at 18 degrees here in the capital, Daegu, Gyeongju, both seeing a high of 20 degrees, which is about 8 degrees lower than yesterday under bright sunshine. We'll also have to brave strong winds across the country, and on top of that, the air in the eastern regions is gradually becoming drier. Pleasant spring weather persists through the end of April with rain in the forecast on Jeju on Sunday. Just remember that big temperature difference between morning and afternoon and do dress in layers to stay comfortable throughout the day.
That is all we have at this hour. We'll be back with more updates at 5 p.m. Korea time. Thanks for watching.